Let's give him a big round of applause. There we go. That was my bad. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hey, I love coming over here, and this was the first campus that we planted. I'm sure Pastor John's visiting. We now have 5, and just opened our campus in Union at Easter. It's all Spanish, and this last Sunday they had 52 people there. Started in one of our people's homes, and so it is really beginning to take off. We're expanding. When I go there, it's very difficult for me because I speak about 4 words of Spanish. But they're doing wonderful. And it's great to be here today with each and every one of you. We're going to continue this series. We hit the pause button last week so we could have Heath Adamson. Did you guys enjoy Heath? He's amazing, amazing, amazing guy. And but today we're going to jump back into, you can see it on the screen there, the Thrive series, how to survive and flourish in an unsure world. And boy, how many think it's a little bit of an unsure world we're living in right now, right? I mean, when you look at what's going on in our nation, especially a week after elections, you look at what's going on in the world, if you don't think it's unsure out there, I want to encourage you to take your pulse, because you may not be breathing, right? It's crazy what's going on in our world. Things are shaky out there, and so what is God's plan? Well, when we're living in this world, you know, we have to understand that God's plan is not based on what's going on in the world. God's plan is based on what He wants to do. And so part of the challenge that you and I face is, how do we make sure we stay over on the God side of things, right? And we're not kind of sucked in to the world's plan. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because that's the way we base each and every one of our lives. And so I thought about, not only does the world affect the way we think and the way we do things, but also sometimes our own personal perception of who we are or what's going on in our life. It affects us as well. Sometimes people just occasionally don't think, or sometimes a lot, they don't think they have what it takes to really thrive in a personal way. It reminds me of a story that I heard recently about, a true story about, this was happening in a school district in San Francisco, and they had this kind of ingenious little experiment that they wanted to try. So they selected these 3 teachers, and the principal called them into the office, and he said to them, he said, look, you're the best we have. And we have selected 90 high IQ students for you to work with throughout this entire school year. And we're going to see just how far they can go with you working with them bringing what they do to the table by the end of the year. We want to just see amazing things. And so sure enough, they all worked really diligently. And at the end of the year, they had accomplished and achieved 20 to 30% more than not only the kids in their school, but anybody in the entire school district. And so the principal called the 3 teachers into the office, and he said, great job, but I have a confession to make to you. He said, those 90 high IQ students, they weren't really high IQ students. And as a matter of fact, they were just randomly selected from the entire student body. We just told them about who we thought they were. And then the teachers looked at each other and thought, well, then we did an awesome job. We just got to prove who we are. Then the principal said, oh yeah, and by the way, I have another confession to make to you. It's not that you were necessarily the 3 best, but your name was just randomly the first 3 picked out of a hat of all of our teachers. And so, of course, the moral of the story is, when you think you can do something great, you will do something great. They thought that they could take those students to a new level. They thought they had something going. Those students thought that they were specially selected for this program. And so that's a little bit the way that it works in the kingdom as well. It's this idea that we have what it takes to thrive according to God's plan. So whose report are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the world's report? Are you going to believe your own perception? Or are you going to kind of move your life over to the place where you begin to believe God's report on your life? I want to share a great verse with you about God's report for you, just in case you're wondering. This is one of my favorite life verses. It talks about our capacity to flourish. And in Jeremiah 29:11 it says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Let's read this last verse together, the last part of it. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Okay, that was me reading by myself. This time we're going to do it all together, right up from the very beginning. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Now catch it. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Can somebody say hallelujah? You see, that's God's report to you. That's God's thought concerning you. And part of what we do is we have to win this battle. And I thought about, when that verse was written, to really understand the impact of that verse, you have to climb into the historical setting to which it was written. Do you know that that verse was written to a group of people who were being held captive in a foreign land? This is what the book of Daniel is all about. This is what we have been studying. And so what it talks about is God's plan to bring us to the point where we flourish and thrive has a lot more to do, now listen to me, has a lot more to do with what's going on inside of us than what's happening around us. Can I say that again? Your plan for you, God's plan for you to flourish and prosper, has a lot more to do with what's happening in here than what's happening out there. And we're at a time in the world where we just really need to hear that. And so that's really what we've been studying over the last few weeks, in case you haven't had a chance to be here. So God wants you to thrive. That is in the will of God, according to that verse that's right in front of you. And we discovered that this very thing was something that Daniel understood. In this study, we've kind of been looking at some components in his life. We've been drawing some life lessons about how to not just survive, but actually how to flourish. And I would say this, how to flourish no matter what the world throws at you. Because Daniel had more stuff thrown at him than you could ever imagine. And we're going to underline kind of one of those again today. So, and remember that Daniel ends up in Babylon with a group of many other people from Judah, the southern kingdom. God had sent them there in captivity as punishment for years and years of disobedience, for kind of blowing off God. So he sends them in punishment to Babylon, and they're there under this cruel and oppressive king, Nebuchadnezzar. And it's in that group that first goes off to Babylon that 15-year-old Daniel is part of that group. And so here he is at 15 years old, and he is technically a prisoner of war. Can you imagine that? That's the way you really have to look at this. And yet from the time that he's 15 until he's 85, we find out in this terrible culture under these three oppressive kings, he's actually promoted 5 different times. Can you imagine? And by the end of his life, he ends up the second most powerful person in the kingdom, in this kingdom that was the most powerful kingdom in its day and age across the world. Now that's what you call thriving. That's what you call flourishing, even though everything was stacked up against him. And so that's the kind of a life that God wants us to understand. He wants us to live. He doesn't want us just living in survival. He wants us living in significance. And so how do we get there? Well, for the last couple of weeks we've looked at Daniel chapter 1. But this morning I want you to take your Bible and turn with me to Daniel chapter 2, because here's what we're going to address. This is really cool, guys. What do you do when you're asked to do something that to you it seems impossible? What do you do when you're asked to do something, but when you hear it, it seems impossible? That's exactly where Daniel, we find himself. Have you ever been asked to do something, and as soon as you hear it, you have that grumbling, down inside your stomach, and there's just something in the pit of your being that you're like in panic? You ever have something like that? And it's just like that instant panic, and you're instantly almost sick to your stomach. Can you imagine what happens when Daniel gets the news that we're going to read about in this particular case, the pit that was in his stomach? I remember when I was in junior high school, I remember this event, and that was a long time ago, by the way, but I remember this event like it was yesterday. I remember we went into gym class that day, had my little green shorts on. In those days, you young people, you would enjoy it. Everybody wore the same thing. Had our little green shirt on, we had our Aurora physical education shirt on, and we went to gym class. How many can remember those days, right? A few of us that are a little bit older here. So we go there, and I'm a pretty good athlete, so I usually enjoy gym. But this particular day, I didn't see any basketballs, I didn't see any footballs, no volleyballs out there, I didn't see any of these things. What I saw was a rope hanging from the ceiling of the gym. And of course, the gym instructor takes us over and he goes, we're all going to climb the rope to the top of the ceiling. And I had that feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'd never climbed a rope. I was skinny. I was weak, right? And so I was thinking, oh no, and we're gonna do this right in front of everybody. I went, really? I mean, oh no. And so I thought it was just virtually impossible. And by the way, in case you're wondering how the story ended up, it didn't go good. It did not go well. But we're going to draw a few principles out of somebody that was presented with an impossible situation that it did go well. But there were some reasons why it went well. Because maybe your situation that you looked at impossible or are looking at today as impossible, maybe it's not caused by a rope hanging in the middle. I mean, it would be bad if we had this in the sanctuary. So we're all climbing it today. Living illustration today. But maybe it's not a rope. But maybe your impossible situation, maybe it's something that a boss asked you. Maybe it was a peek at your check or your savings checkbook or savings account last week. Maybe it was a situation or a relationship that you find yourself in the midst of that when you look at it from your vantage point, it looks impossible. Maybe it's something you have no training in and you're thinking, I don't know how to do that, What do you do in such a situation? Well, that's exactly where Daniel finds himself in Daniel chapter 2, because these advisors come to him and say, we need you to interpret the king's wild and crazy dream. We have no record of this 15-year-old boy, maybe 17 or 18 by this time, ever interpreting anybody's dreams, let alone the dream of a wild man who was the most powerful king in all of the world. And as a matter of fact, when the advisors come, little does Daniel know that they'd already told the king, and we read about this in the text, they'd already told the king, King, what you ask is impossible. There's no man on earth that can do what you ask. And that scenario, you got me? Are you staying with me today? That's where we find Daniel right now. And so here we are in Daniel chapter 2. He's facing the impossible, but he knows, hear me now, he knows that he serves a God that makes the impossible possible. He knows he serves a God who makes the undoable doable, the unknown known, and the supernatural natural. That's what he brings into this scenario. Daniel 2, verse 1. We got a pretty big passage to read here today. Here we go. All right, ready? In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. All right, now let me hit the pause button here for a minute. What's going on here is the king has this dream, but you have to understand the culture to which he was living. The Babylonian culture was a culture that was totally built upon the occult, okay? The entire thing was built upon the occult. And we kind of see it outlined here in these scriptures. We'll look at a little bit more at it today. But it was built especially on astrology, not astronomy. Astronomy is a science and the study of stars. Astrology, astrological science, it is a cult, and that's what they were building. If you, I don't know whether whether Pastor John talked about it here, but recently when we started this series, I talked to the people of Wyckoff that you need to hear this right now. Babylon was not just an ancient culture. Babylon is a satanic system, and Babylon is still in existence today. And the book of Revelation tells us that the last enemy that God will fight in this world will be the Babylon system. And so we still see it today in every single place. And so here it is, it's this occult thing, and this is what Daniel's facing. Look at the rest of verses 2. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I had a dream. This is his advisor. I had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers, not the astronomers, the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servant the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. This is almost funny. He's going, you're going to get this one right. All right? He says, This is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. That's good news, right? No, not, right? But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there's only one penalty for me, for you. You have conspired to tell me endless meaning and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. And the astrologers answered the king, underline this in your Bible, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great or mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious, he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. As I was reading this, I thought, we almost needed to have Tim up here on the keyboard, playing that, because that's the kind of story that's taking place here. King Nebuchadnezzar has this disturbing nightmare. He calls all of these occult people and wants the dream interpreted, and boom, they instantly fail. They say, we're not even going to give it a shot. What you're asking is impossible. And he says, okay, then I'm going to kill you and all your buddies. And of course, this now includes Daniel and his friends. And I want to tell you, when all of it seems hopeless, when all of it seems out of control, this is a word for somebody here today. That's when God does his best work. In the scenarios where God can get the most glory, you will see God do the most work. And so that's what we're going to see unveiled here. No matter what is thrown at Daniel, we're going to see him thrive, not because of who he is, but because of who he trusts. And so in these next several verses, we see that God will move in Daniel's life to accomplish what seems to be an impossible. And through that, I want to give you today some life-giving principles about how you can thrive no matter what's thrown at you, even if it looks impossible. And I want to tell you from personal experience that every one of these things that I want to share with you, I've tried these in my life. I've had to employ these, whether in my personal life or in my family or even in our church on several occasions, because they work. So I hope you brought a pen and pencil, because these are going to help you today. I want you to write this down. What do you do when you're faced with this impossible situation? Well, here's the starting point. Here's number one. Choose to trust and not panic. Somebody say amen. Amen. Choose to trust and not panic. In Daniel's case, he had a very legitimate reason to be very, very worried. I want you to remember that not only were the lives of the wise men on the line, so was Daniel's life on the line. Look at verse 14. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Underline that. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? And Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. And so you say, well, where do I start with this? Well, what does this look like? Well, when you choose to trust and not panic, it begins first and foremost with changing your mindset. Write that down. To trust and not panic, you got to change your mindset, because that's what happens with Daniel. Daniel realized that first and foremost, this victory was going to be won not out there, but in the 6 inches between his ears. Are you with me? This is where the victory had to be won in his own heart and in his own mind. And so he reminds himself who he ultimately serves, the God of heaven. And then he reminds himself of all the promises the God of heaven has given him. He's changing his mindset. He's renewing his mind. He's reworking this whole scenario from a God perspective. And so he expects God to do something. And so he moves into trust mode and refuses to go. Say refuses. Let all of you say refuses. Refuses to go into panic mode. Man, we can learn some things from that. See, he expected God to do the best, not the worst in this situation. And what always amazes me every time I read Daniel is he's only a teenager. And he's talking about the most powerful man on the planet has just ordered his assassination. But he still chooses to not panic. And it's incredible. So here's Arioch. He actually shows up in this scene that we're reading about in chapter 2. He shows up to kill Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so here he is, and it says that instead, what Daniel chooses to do is use some wisdom and tact. That's why I wanted you to underline that. So let's get real here for just a minute this morning, and let me ask you something. What in your life are you panicked about? What in your life are you panicked about this morning? A job? Young people, maybe a test, maybe a financial situation, maybe some of you, your health, future, relationship. Well, let's follow Daniel's example here and not go into panic mode, but change our mindset and fix our mind on God and not on the problem. And here's what we do. When we get into that thing, we say, God, I got to get this thing worked out so you can give it your best shot. Not necessarily me give it my best shot. You can give it your best shot. Can I get an amen? Because that's the mindset we need to approach what gets thrown at us in life from. And so